I just want to remind you on a couple of principles that we spoke about. We spoke about parenting is, the goal of parenting is to shape the heart of our children. It's not to achieve good behavior. So you can, good behavior in its own way is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, obviously, to have children who are well behaved, obedient, and able to listen to your voice. But it's actually quite a low standard because you can achieve it through being quite a harsh parent, or by bribing your children, or manipulating them in some other way. You can get good behavior out of your children, but it's not enough to sustain them in the long term of life. And so the goal of parenting is to shape their hearts so that when they're not with you, and when one day when they leave home, ultimately, that they will self-govern, they will look after themselves when they're outside of your parental sphere of influence. So it's really, everything we're going to do is going to be about shaping the heart and not trying to control behavior. If you're controlling behavior, then you might be aiming at quite a low standard. Thanks. So the next thing is, we spoke about how there really are standards of parenting that are set by God. And so we would love to see in our children characteristics such as kindness and self-control and the ability to control anger. Humility. I mean, these are things that we would love to see our children behaving like. Of course, they don't come like that. So that's the goal of parenting. So we want to get all the stuff we don't want out of our children, anger and selfishness and all the rest of the stuff we see in our children that we don't like, and we want to replace it with all the good stuff, and that's a standard that is set by God. So one of the risks we face as parents is that we look at our children who are so different from each other, and we see all these different personalities, and the children behave differently, and we are tempted to adjust the standard to the child. And we are tempted to say, well, this child is particularly angry, or just is prone to anger, so we're not going to try and get them to be able. That standard of being in control is too high a standard. We'll bring the standard to the child. So that's a risk of parenting, is that we make excuses for our children, and we say our child will never be able to get there, so we would rather just reduce the standard. Because it's easier, and we excuse our children's behavior. So we've done it. I'm sure we've all done it to some degree, and it's just not. It's not what we want to do. We want to have an approach to parenting which is saying there's a gap between where our children are and where they need to be, and we pray and we ask God, how do we bring the child to the standard? Even for those where that gap is really big, we don't want to change. We don't want to break the building code. That was the example. So there's many styles of building, but there's one building code. And that's what we're looking for. Thank you. And then we spoke about how we want to see children as they are not the center of the family. Our decisions around parenting do not revolve around the happiness of our children. We are thinking past the happiness of the moment, and we are looking long term, and we see our children as a welcome addition to the family, but one that is going to leave one day, hopefully. That's what you want. It's a good thing that your children would leave home. Okay? So you don't want to make any of your children, the center of the family, because at some point they will leave, and then you're left with trying to pick up the pieces of a marriage that maybe has been neglected, or something else, and you feel a bit lost as a parent. So children must be brought into the family, welcomed in, but at the end of the day, their happiness is not the center of the occasion. It's what God is doing in your family, and we speak a lot about that, yeah. And then we spoke a lot about being proactive. So one of the things of parenting, and especially if you've got more than one child, is you're often reacting to something that they have already done. And it's often bad stuff that you react to. So your things get broken, and children are hitting each other and arguing and disobeying and doing all the stuff that children do. And then as parents, so much of our parenting is in reaction to that negativity, and it's often a negative interaction. So this is not to say that you do not react. So there are definitely times that you have to react to your children. But on the other hand, the more you can move your parenting to before those things happen, the more successful you'll be, the more fruit you'll see from your parenting. And it's much easier if you can train yourself to try and, in a sense, be ahead of the game, so that you're able to speak into situations and actually call out the good that you want to see, as opposed to react to the bad that you don't want to see. So the part of the goal of our parenting is to establish the good as well as removing the bad. But I think you'll find, and we certainly notice this, if you were to record all of your parenting conversations with your children, your interactions with your children, how much of it is negative? In other words, you're reacting to a situation. And I think you'll find a lot of it is negative. You are correcting, you're disciplining, you're punishing, warning, whatever, rebuking your children, and that's all fine. But if you're not also building the good, you get into it's just a slightly negative cycle. And then the last sort of principle we spoke about last night was parental unity, and having time together as parents to establish the vision for your family, to establish where you're going in your parenting, to agree. I think very important. It's so important, it's so vital that mom and dad are in agreement about what they are doing in their parenting. And that agreement is not just about the long-term vision. It also includes, how you're going to discipline your children, what tools of discipline, which is what we're talking about tonight. What are the issues that you're currently dealing with for every child? And we have found, for us as a married couple, the time that we have spent, and we make it a daily discipline, we almost without fail, unless one of us is not at home, we will spend every morning, we have a cup of coffee together, and we discuss from the daily sort of routines of what's happening in our life that day. But if we're facing one of the issues of our family, where a child's behavior is concerning us, or we're just seeing something coming in that we don't like, we'll discuss it then. So we come into agreement about how we're going to do this, how are we going to tackle it, so that when something happens and I'm not there, Sheila will deal with it in the same way, in a sense, with the same authority, with the same confidence that I would, because I'm not going to come home and say, "Oh, what are you doing?" I wouldn't have done that. And we've come into agreement. And there really is something important there, because God blesses unity. He really does. And it's worth fighting for. And I would go so far as to say, if you're not in agreement as a husband and wife, I would not proceed into what we're talking about until you are. In other words, fight for it, work it out, until you come into agreement, and then you can work from there. Were there any questions for those of you who were here last night that you want to ask, or any questions about that? Because I've gone through it. I've just done an hour's teaching in a few minutes. Martin.
Like, if your kid's sick, you don't want to understand it. If your kid's sick, do you understand it temporarily?
Temporary amnesty. Okay, so the question was, if your child is sick or tired, I would go, sometimes at the end of a very long day, your children are exhausted and are going to behave badly. And so you can end up in a situation where, because of where the child is at, you are in a battle zone. And if you try to push for a very high standard of behavior, you will inevitably end up in quite severe conflict, and nobody wins out of that conflict. What we've done in our family in those situations is when we see our children are going to unravel for whatever reason, sickness or tiredness or hunger at the end of the day, whatever it is, we don't lower the standard, but this is where I would say it's really important to be a proactive parent. You get in and you don't allow bad behavior before it happens. So for us, what that would look like is, if our children are really tired, there's been times when it's just like, guys, it's time for everybody to go to bed. And we just put everybody in bed, and that's where they end up. Or what would be another example? Can you think of another example?
If they're sick, like, we're very strict with screen time. We've always been very strict with that. We just let them watch movies. If that just is what it takes, then that's fine. The beauty of having certain standards where the children feel very safe because they know there's a bit of a routine, or mum and dad are very firm on certain things, is there's flexibility. If you've got an elastic band, in those seasons you can stretch it and it can be different. But then it always goes back to how it was. So the thing is, as mum and dad, to go back to how you were, that perhaps they can't talk to you like that, or they need to do this, or they can't do that.
Yeah. And there's definitely been times when we have backed down from a fight. When you just, you can have a child, particularly if they're quite a strong-willed child, and if they're tired, you can do what you like. You can stand on your head and sing and threaten and punish, and you will not win that battle because of where the child is at. And we have, in those cases, generally, we do, as the parents, will back away. We won't try to insist on the letter of the law. We will, in a sense, the child probably just be put to bed at that point, and we might deal with it in the morning.
Well, I go to bed.
Or Sheila goes to bed.
I'm joking.
For this. No. There are times when it's unhelpful to really push to the letter of the law, or when I say the letter of the law, the standard that you know to be right. You're just not going to get there through strict parenting at that point, and we would back away from that.
You just have grace.
But those, to me, they are characterized always by being the exception. In other words, you can't do that consistently, because then you will lose the battle in the long run with the war. It's okay as parents to back away from sort of individual battles if you feel you're just not going to win them, because often the destruction of relationship is worse than winning. In other words, if you did win that battle, you might come at too great a cost in terms of relationship. So there are definitely times when you would back away, it might be that there's a greater skill needed in how to help that child achieve a certain standard, and when they are tired. So we've had examples. So one of our children is prone to anger, and we would notice if they were very tired, often at the end of the day, they would flare up at one of their siblings, and it would get and then because for us we were very strict on sibling rivalry, we wouldn't allow it. So then we would have to parent that in reaction to that moment, and it was frustrating because now everybody's unhappy, and the whole evening has in a sense been ruined by tiredness manifesting as anger. So when we see that coming now, one of us will quietly take that child aside and say, we can see that you're feeling tired, and that he's old enough to talk to, this is from about 5 or 6 years old, where you can actually explain things. We would say, that when you get tired, you sometimes get angry with one of your children, and the consequences if you do that. And so we're just telling you now, we can see this coming. Maybe it's better for you to go and sit in your room and just read a book by yourself. So it's not a punishment. We're just saying to you, there's wisdom now. And they start to learn to read their own emotions. And that's what proactive parenting is. You don't wait for it to deteriorate to bloodshed and then have to react. You try and get in there first and head off the disaster that's coming your way. Yeah. So right. So what we want to talk about tonight is obedience. First time obedience. It's a very high standard of parenting, but it really looks like, firstly it's achievable when there's parental energy and resolve to do it, and it's absolutely foundational to so much of our shaping of our children's hearts. And it really looks like a parent giving a reasonable instruction and the child being able to obey, in other words, to overcome the natural rebellion in their heart, and to be able to obey mom and dad with a happy heart. In other words, it's not a begrudging response. It's actually not, I want to obey mom and dad, and they do it all the way. In other words, they complete the instruction, they complete whatever it is that you've asked them to do, and that is what we are aiming for. So it is a very high standard. I will give it to you. And we have found,
work on it all the time.
It's even with our older children, it's a constant thing that we are working towards. So one of the things I said last night is we are going to present a very high standard of parenting, and almost in a sense an ideal, and the risk is that you would think, I can never achieve that, and then you give up trying. So don't measure yourself against the end point. Measure yourself against how you do compared to what you were doing last week or yesterday, and just incrementally grow towards the ideal, because it's like that. And but I also want to say it's absolutely foundational to the shaping of our hearts. If you think about how God relates to us, we are invited into the family of God, and we respond in our faith in Jesus Christ. And then God starts to teach us obedience. One of the first things he wants of us is not just our obedience out of fear of him, but because we love God, that we would be prepared to obey him. That's what God wants for us, is he wants a willing heart. If you think, look back in the Old Testament, how many times God would cry out to the Israelites who were prone to disobedience, and he would say, oh, that your hearts were willing to obey me. He wants that willingness to obey, because you can get your children to obey you just by threatening them. If you do not do this, you will get a hiding, or you will have that privilege revoked. You may not watch TV. You know, you can, just with a change of your voice, you can get your children to obey you, or glare at them, or wave a finger at them, or whatever it is. And your children will respond, but you won't have won their hearts. It's not a willing response. So that's why I say obedience in itself is quite a low standard, but for this thing of a willing heart, a child that wants to obey mom and dad, who are able to respond to your voice happily, is the goal. So there are quite significant differences between the two. And I really want to also encourage you, as believers, we want our children to at some point come into their own relationship with God. That is one of the goals of our parenting, is that they would be able to love God and to follow him, which also requires obedience. They're going to have to learn to obey God, just like we do. And if you think of some things of what God might have done in your life when you've disobeyed him, and he's had to, in a sense, take you around the mountain of your disobedience so you don't make any progress, there's a lack of fruitfulness in your life. So if we do not obey God, it's not like we get punished. I mean, that can come. You can be punished by God if you fall into a pattern of disobedience. But generally, it leads to a lack of fruitfulness. We don't grow in the faith if we are disobedient. And so if we as parents do not require obedience from our children, if we have, in a sense, a very relaxed approach, in other words, we'd be happy if our children obeyed us half the time, or a tenth of the time would be a success. We are essentially setting our children up for a very difficult relationship with God one day, because they will not be used to obeying authority. And especially when your children are young, you are God to your children. They do not know who God is. They do not care who God is. They do not know about Jesus Christ. They do not know about the Holy. They're young. They're puppies still, And so our voice as parents is the authority. We are God to our children. And as they grow up and they start to understand the things of God, so they will transition from being under our authority to God's authority. That's the goal of our parenting. But if we've never required obedience and never trained it, they will struggle in their relationship with God.
We represent God to our children. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to clarify.
Yeah, that we aren't God.
Supreme dictator for life. Okay. Move. There we go. Lovely. Thank you. So what you'll find is in your children, there lives, in fact, not just in your children, even in your own heart, in every human heart, is you are generally in either in a state of obedience or a state of rebellion. The two potentials exist in your heart. And so what that looks like is, you think about it. If you're given an instruction by a superior, your boss or the government or anybody who has authority into your life, immediately in your own heart will rise up an element of rebellion. You'll question it. You'll like, why would I want to do that? Why should I do that? And it's depending on how you respect that authority, that state of rebellion will either be a very powerful force, or it will be, it's okay, I trust that person, I will overcome that natural rebellion and follow a path of obedience. That exact same situation happens every single time, I think, when you speak to your children to give them an instruction, is that there's a natural, part of the fallenness of mankind is that there is a natural rebellion towards you. And part of your parenting is going to be understanding that and helping your children overcome it. They're going to have to learn to overcome the natural rebellion within their hearts. One of the risks of parenting is that you just expect them to do it naturally. In other words, that they'll just overcome. But that's actually a skill to learn to overcome rebellion in your own heart, and your children have to do it. So a lot of the tools that we are going to speak about tonight, or some of the tips that we speak about, is how do we train our children to recognize and, in a sense, overcome rebellion so that they are able to be obedient in their hearts. So let's have a look at how we do that. Okay, so what are the risks that we face when we, next slide there, please. Stop, there we go. The risks of waiting for children to obey. Okay, so if you just hang around expecting your children to obey you, you are going to struggle. You might wait a very long time. And some children are more naturally obedient than others. They have a desire to please mom or dad, and they will be easier to work with. Others will not be like that, and you just don't know what you're going to get in your children, of course. So if you've seen that in your own family, you'll know that. So this is a moment not just to hang around and wait for something to happen. It's an intentional parenting moment to train our children to obey us. So often what happens, if I've listened to my early days of parenting and listened to many other parents, the requirement for obedience looks like this. So it starts off. We try to coax our children into obeying us. So coaxing is an old English word where we'd like, oh, come on, guys, why don't you think it would be a good idea to pack up your toys now? And we sort of try and sort of herd cats. Have you ever tried herding cats, you know? And they're just doing their own thing. And we sort of almost pleading with our children to obey us. And then often what will happen is when that proves very often to be very fruitless, we start to bribe our children or threaten them. One of the two extremes we'll look at. So, oh guys, you know what, guys, if you all pack up your toys now and come for supper, we'll have pudding tonight. And we offer a bribe. Or guys, if you don't come right now, you're all getting a hiding. And we threaten our children. Okay, so often a response to a lack of obedience. Sorry, that was the next one, was threatening. And then if we have threatened, go to the next one, there will be a pretense of a consequence. So what will happen then is that if you have issued a threat, okay, guys, if you do not pack up now, you're all going to the bathroom. Right, that's it. And we start walking towards our children in a looming, threatening manner. So our kids are watching us, and they've gone through this many times, and they are normally faster than us. And even the moment you sort of get there, they like start to pack up the toys, okay? But they're all the time, they're trying to decide, how serious is mom and dad? They've got to try and make that decision. Are you really serious or not? And they're having to weigh it up. And then often what will happen is there'll be an incomplete consequence. So maybe you've actually got to the child, you've got them by the arm or the wrist, and you're now hauling them off to the bathroom, and they start to, oh, Mom, I'm so sorry, and I'll pack up now, and they run back and they start packing up the toys, and you don't follow through with your threat. And but think about what happens in that moment in their heart. Okay.
You're all laughing.
Sorry,
you don't
boss.
do this, hey? No, nor did we.
You think about what you are actually establishing in their heart, right there and then, is you're saying, you are building a characteristic, which is, if mom and dad look like they're serious, and I turn on tears, and I start manifesting this thing like that, I can manipulate, and that's the word you've got to use. You're training your children to manipulate you by their tears or their emotional response or whatever it might be, and it's very unhelpful. So often what the next thing happens is you get conditional obedience. In other words, having gone through that exhausting sequence of events, your children do obey you, but now it looks like packing up the toys in the box. And they're watching you to see, because they'll do it on their terms. You haven't won. You think about it, you haven't won their hearts in the slightest at that point. They are obeying you, but maybe it's because you've intimidated them to obey you.
They're on a go slow.
They're on a go slow, a municipal go slow. And the end result is annoyance and frustration for everybody, actually. That is not a happy sequence of events. But yet we see this time and again, even in our own parenting. We fall into this pattern. So we're not at all judgmental. We have been there many times. but we know the result is always, it's a frustrating place to be. So, just another couple of points is that we're not there to exasperate or embitter your children. So when Paul was writing his letter to the church in Ephesus, he writes this statement, and he's actually writing to the children, who presumably were listening to this letter being read out. Children, he says, obey your parents. That's an instruction from God that they should do that. And then he gives immediately a counter instruction to the parents. Parents, do not exasperate or do not embitter or do not frustrate. The word can be translated equally. Exasperate, frustrate, embitter your children. In other words, don't be so nitpicky, don't be so harsh that your children become embittered in their hearts. So you can see God's heart here. He wants the children to obey, and they are required by God to obey. That's their instruction. But parents, there's a skill on how we do this. Now you've got to hold the two in tension, you see, because we can extract obedience, but you will not win their hearts if you do that. That's the heart of the matter. Okay, so when would you expect obedience? So often in a case like this, if there's 3 points here, if you can bring it up, well, first one, we expect our children to obey us when they run into the road and we see a car coming, and you just shout, "Stop!" And everything in our tone of voice, we would expect our children to obey. And they probably will, hopefully, obey at that point. So we always expect it at that point. Very often, and this is where it gets very grey for us, is when we have the energy for it. So, if you are refreshed and you've had a good night's sleep and work has gone well, you come home and you're onto this parenting thing, and we are going to do this, okay? And you've got the energy for it, and you require your children and you work with them, but on the other hand, the counter argument's equally true. We come home exhausted from work, and there was a terrible night the night before, and we're not talking about the children here. This is the parents. The parents are too tired or traumatized by the day to require their children to obey them. But just think of that, what that actually leads to in your family. If your parenting energies ebb and flow all the time, and every time you come home, your children have to evaluate you to work out, are mom and dad going to be serious tonight? They'll do it subconsciously.
Are they in a good mood or a bad mood?
Yeah.
How far can I take it?
No, really, and we've seen that in families that we've got friends with, and if dad's tired, he's maybe prone to being angry and a lot more strict. So they, literally, you'll see the kids. They're watching, they're working out what mood is dad in. Okay, we'll probably get away with like this level of behavior, and it breeds insecurity when we are inconsistent. So we don't want to expect obedience just when we have the energy for it. And the other one is also true is when our children have their emotional ups and downs, and there are times where they are compliant and they will happily obey, and there are times when stubbornness and irritation set in their hearts, often when they're tired, like you were saying, Martin, or even sick, and we lower the standard of obedience at that point, because it's too much work to get a non-compliant child to do it. But at the end of the day, what we want is our children we want to be in a frame of mind, a mindset where we are expecting it in our hearts, that our children would obey us all the time. It doesn't matter how you're feeling, it doesn't matter how your child is feeling, I think with that exception that we were talking about, if you're going to lose the battle. But we don't want our children to be having to guess whether or not they should be obedient. It should be a requirement. They should know at every point that mom and dad are going to be expecting it. In other words, it's not conditional. And I mean, now that I think about it, Martin, your question about, what happens if your children are very sick? Not very sick, just sick and tired of you, and sick and tired and not likely to respond. It's fine to back away from a standard. But honestly, I think it's like got to be the exception, because the moment it becomes a bit of a pattern, what you would be encouraging is like if your children don't want to obey you, they'll start, I'm not feeling, mom and dad, I'm feeling, I'm not feeling a bit sick, like kids when they don't want to go to school, I've got a stomach ache, headache, and But if you give in to that thing, you actually are encouraging them to adopt sickness, in a sense, in their hearts, to manipulate you. So I would use it cautiously, I suppose, if I think about it now, so that we don't actually allow manipulation. Because that's a, manipulation in children they are poised to manipulate us at the moment, at the slightest moment, and we never want to allow that heart of manipulation to set up camp in their hearts, because it's a nasty thing to be a manipulative person. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for. We want to now look at the detail of this. How are we going to do it? And we'll try and get very practical about this. There are 3 areas of things we're going to look at. Okay, so the first one is communication, consistency, and consequences. We've called them the 3 C's of first-time obedience, and we will unpack each one of these things: communication, consistency, and consequences. So let's have a look at what we're going to talk at there. Proactive communication, first one. So this is important. You'll notice I've deliberately used the word proactive. So this is happening long before any parenting moment has happened. Okay, you're not in reaction to anything. So the first one, which I've spoken on a bit, is what I called couch time or coffee zone. In other words, and I'll re-emphasize the point, do not proceed with parenting until you have unity in a husband and wife, because you will find it very difficult to be fruitful in that case. So what that can look like very practically: parenting children is not for the faint-hearted. Okay, it's a big topic. It's you're dealing with these young children, each of whom are uniquely fashioned by God, with individual personalities and character traits. And there are so many things that you could be parenting. You could be parenting their sleeping patterns, their eating behavior, what they're doing at school, the friends they're hanging out with, the games they're playing, how much TV, blah-de-blah, endless arenas of parenting, you might call them, areas of parenting. And they change as your children get older. So there is, in a sense, a constant, ongoing conversation that you could be having around parenting all the time, every day, all the time. And if you try to win every single battle all the time, you're going to exhaust yourself. So what I would strongly recommend is, as a couple, sit down and pray about it and ask God to show you, for each child, what is the one area that you're going to tackle first. So what is the one thing? And almost immediately you'll probably know in your heart, it's this thing. It's this lying behavior. It's this lack of obedience. It's this sibling rivalry. There'll be one thing that really annoys you about an area of parenting for a child, or even within your family.
There's a saying, how do you eat an elephant? And they say one bite at a time. Because you can get overwhelmed. You look at some children, you just go, where do I start? So we want to encourage you, start with one thing. Even if it's a small thing, and you need to get a few wins under your belt before you hit the biggie that's looking you in the eye. Start with one bite, and if you just consistently take one more bite, one more bite, one more bite, you'll eat your elephant.
I think that's a key point, what Sheila was saying about there might be a very big area of disobedience that you almost like circle because you're not quite sure how to do it. And your children are not used to listening to you. So it might be easier to train them on a lesser issue where you're more likely to succeed. And so start there, literally, like start with a low-hanging fruit, and so that your children get used to obeying you on something that's easy for them to obey you on. But these are the conversations that you want to have as a couple. And I would also ask God for his advice and ask for the Holy Spirit to lead you, and then confidently go into a discussion of how you're going to do it, because we'll talk about some of the tools that you can use, but you've got to decide which tools are best for which children, because it's quite a unique thing. So some children respond to this type of parenting, and some children respond better to that style of parenting, so you've got to work it all out. But you know what? You are the right parents for your children. You've got to remember that. God gave them to you, and He knows that. So you must know, you must be confident in your heart that it's in you. You have everything you need for life and godliness, so the scriptures say.
And I don't know if any of you are single parents or you've got friends who're single parents and you might be encouraging them. Couch time, you go, well, I haven't got a spouse to have couch time with. We say, have it with God. You and Jesus, chat. He's your husband. He really is. And you chat to him. And even if it's you sit on the couch and you say to your kids, I'm having couch time with God. I've got my coffee, he and I are chatting. Let us just sort out whatever we're doing. And it's just as effective as if you were with your husband or your wife.
Yeah, okay. So what you're wanting to achieve on that couch is not more children. Is you're wanting to agree on the major issues that you're going to deal with. You are going to, or per child, how are you going to deal with them? What are going to be the consequences if your children disobey you in that thing? And you're going to agree that this is the path that we're going on. So there's resolve that you're going to do it. Okay, so you're in that space. That's a key. The next one is what we termed Milo time, all right? So in our family, Milo, which is like hot chocolate, I don't know, do you get Milo in Zim? Yeah, if it's a popular drink here. It was a real luxury in our family. So it's not like their kids could have it every day. So what you're wanting to do with Milo time is set up a time with your children which is a happy moment. It's a moment when you are going to explain the way the game is changing, in a sense, what you're going to be requiring of them. You're going to be talking about the consequences of disobedience. You're going to be talking about the heart of obedience. You're going to be communicating with your children, and this can happen even with young children. If you were to call out in your home, who would like some ice cream? And your children are able to say, yes, I want ice cream. You can start to communicate with them on all of these issues. They understand enough language to, even before they can speak. It's very clear that a child's brain is able to understand what you're saying long before they can communicate back to you. And so as best you can, for each child's age group, you're going to communicate the heart of why they are suddenly going to be required to obey mom and dad. That's the key. You want to explain the heart of it.
And it's out of conflict. So it's not in the moment when they've just slapped their sister. It's the day before or an hour before when you know. And that is the key. So it's not a in the moment reactive thing. It's proactive, out of conflict. It's happy, everyone's jolling.
So we would literally have our 2 or 3 kids around the breakfast table. There'd be mugs of Milo with marshmallows in the Milo. We really go over the top. If you can, take them out to a restaurant, have a milkshake. So they are so excited about this particular moment. It's a happy, their hearts are open to hearing your voice. And you start to discuss it, as I say, using the language that they can understand. And it's important that you achieve a couple of things there. Remember, the first thing is you're not just trying to overcome behavior. You're trying to win their hearts. So you've got to explain to them the heart of obedience. Why is it important that they hear you? When mom and dad speak, it's important that they obey because that's what God expects of us. That's really the lineage of the thought, is that this is ultimately about God, and as best you can, you explain it to them, and you say how it makes God happy when, and you can even show them the scriptures. Take a Bible, there it is in Ephesians, and even if they can't read, they're seeing mom and dad referring to the Bible, so there's value there, and you say, look, God says, children, that's you guys, obey your parents. So we're going to be teaching you how to do that. Don't you want to be, and you share the heart. And then you're going to say, and one of the things is, if you disobey us, this is what it's going to look like. So if mom and dad say, pack up the toys, and use real examples, areas maybe where they haven't done well. And you can say, guys, when mom and dad speak and you don't obey us, then this is what the consequence is going to be. And you would, and you can almost, I wouldn't not negotiate, but you can almost get them to come up with the consequences sometime, because children are very strict on themselves.
This works really well for your sort of early teens, late teens, where they help you with the consequences. So you say, when we ask you to do your chore, to do whatever, sweep the house or whatever it is, and you give us long arms, as we call it, that's not obeying us, what do you think would be an adequate consequence? And you might just say, well, they can't watch a movie that night. And they might say, no, you can take our cell phone away for a week. And you go, okay, all right, that's fine. But it helps to get them on board so they agree to the consequence. It's very effective. It's different when they're little. There you just say, this is what mom and dad say. If you do this, then this is the consequence.
We had a friend of ours was talking to us about this, and he was really struggling with his teenage daughter, and she was prone to quite serious lapses of obedience and not doing whatever she should have been doing. And so he took her out, and they did a proactive moment like this, and they drafted a contract, which was valid for a year. I mean, he said, this is just how they approached it. He said, okay, these are going to be, this is the conduct that we are going to agree to. And they literally negotiated it over a cup of coffee. So when you go out at night, you're going to be home at what time? And she would say, 12. He said, no, it's too late, 10. And they literally would negotiate, and then they would agree, okay, it's 11 o'clock, you have to be home. All right, so what are the consequences if you don't come home? And she would say, well, maybe I'll get, and she would come up with the consequence. And they literally went through all the areas of her behavior, what was required of her, and he got her to sign it, like that. And that was the contract valid for a year, for the upcoming year. And so when she did come home late, and she did it just once, she came home late, he just said, well, he showed her the piece of paper. He said, look what you agreed to, 2 weeks, you're grounded. That's it, you're grounded for 2 weeks.
Sorry for you.
And she was unhappy, but she wasn't unhappy with him. She was like, oh. And she never did it again. The point is that this conversation is absolutely vital in taking the negative emotion out of future parenting moments. In other words, when you then have to react to disobedience, all you're going to do is you're going to go back and remind them of that conversation and say, remember what we discussed? Yeah. Yes, Mom. What's the consequence? And they
Another really good thing for little children is to do role play. They love role play. So let's say it's a sibling rivalry. They're being ugly to each other. So then you and your husband or your spouse, you would then role play. I'm going to pretend I'm Thomas, and you're going to pretend you're John, and this is what you sound like. You always said you do that, and you show them what they look like, and you say, this really frustrates us because the Bible says da la la. So this is how we want you to respond, and then we would reenact it, and then you get them to play it out, and they pretend they're being horrible to their brother or their sister, and then no, let's do how we would like you to do it. And so they actually can see what it is, and they get completely involved when you role play. It really is effective for little ones.
So that's the proactive conversation.
But you've got to be proactive, because this sets you up for success. It takes time, but actually the energy expended before means you have far less energy expended afterwards.
It's an investment. It really is an investment. And honestly, we are not experts. We have 4 children, and that's in a sense, our sample size. We are not educational psychologists or anything like that. We have 4 children. But the fruit of this has worked for us. Yeah. Honestly, if I look at our children who are between the ages of 13 and 19, we see the fruit of it. Yeah. Honestly, they happily obey us most of the time. Not all the time, most of the time.
We still work on it.
We still work on it. And there are times when you ask them to do something they don't want to do, so it's not like in a sense they're overexcited and delighted, yeah, I can do this, but they're like, okay, I'll do that. And they respond to our voices, and it's not an antagonistic, we're not fighting each other. So I would really say, these principles, which we didn't invent, really work.
And to do it, if you've got little kids, do it now, because then when you've got teenagers, you don't have the hassles. We haven't had what people call common teenager issues. They're just not an issue in our home. But I think it's because we won the battle now. Don't be discouraged if you do have teens who are on their own journey. It's not undoable. I don't know what the word is.
Irredeemable.
That one. There are things like a contract. You really can do things to overcome. But it does make life easier if you start with the littlies.
Okay. Still on the topic of communication, let's put up the first one there. So what you're going to be doing is issuing reasonable instructions, not asking questions of your children. So again, think back to how you give instructions when you are wanting your children to do something. so often, because I'm not a very sort of a commanding person.
I am.
Sheila's much more commanding than I
Yeah.
am. So I will often hear myself saying to my kids, particularly when they're younger, don't you think it's a good idea to pack up your toys and come for supper? No. And I've asked a question. I haven't given an instruction. Or like,
Don't you
guys,
think it's a good time to go to bed?
don't you think it's bedtime? No. You know what I mean? It's like you are so often, because we, in a sense, we're a little bit, we don't want to come across as overbearing parents. And actually, the heart of it is we're trying to be friends with our children. Okay, we're going to speak a little bit more about this tomorrow. The different age groups of when it's appropriate to be friends with your children. The bottom line is you don't need to be friends with a 2-year-old. Okay, you're giving instructions to a 2-year-old. That doesn't mean they have to be a harsh instruction. It's just a reasonable instruction. Guys, it's supper time. Please pack up your toys. Simple like that. Given in a natural language, a natural tone of voice. It's not a threatening tone of voice or anything like that. It's just, this is the instruction. And don't open a negotiation, because 2-year-olds are good negotiators. And you don't want to be having a discussion with that. Okay. So the next one is require eye contact and a verbal response. Because time and again, you could give an instruction to your children who are playing a game over in the corner there. Guys, it's supper time, please pack up your toys. And then you come back in a minute later and nothing's happened. And then you start wanting to bring about a consequence. And they're like, but Mom, we didn't hear you. And you're thinking, there's no way you couldn't have heard me, but you've got doubt now. There's doubt in the conversation. You see, you can't, and you'll feel like it's unfair to bring about a consequence because they haven't, maybe they didn't hear you, you see. And also, the reality is when children are playing, especially if they're 3 or 4 of them and they've got quite an intense game going, maybe got like some intricate toys that they're playing with, or they're watching a movie, they literally might be very focused on that moment, very focused. And there's Mom in the background, blah, 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 blah. They don't actually, they hear the voice, but the brain hasn't engaged with the words. So it's really important to engage eye contact. So it's, guys, look at me, please. And then everybody looks at Mom and say, give the instruction, and then require a verbal response. Yes, Mom. Because then there's no doubt. You see, you've removed all doubt from the conversation as to whether or not they may or may not have heard or understood you. You can even get them, if they're prone to having this argument, repeat the instruction back to you. So there's no doubt.
I did that before, when I had one particular child who was the master of negotiation. So I'd say, do this, what did I say? And then they'd have to repeat to me what they said. I've got a friend who gets their kids to say, Roger, Mom, just like an army. Roger, Mom. Whatever works for you, but they've acknowledged that you have spoken and they have heard. It really helps draw a line in the sand and give you a clear conscience as a parent to then take the next step if they disobey.
Right, we're still on communication. Next point is giving fair and adequate warning so that you do not exasperate your child, do not frustrate. So we don't want to contravene that Ephesians 6 scripture. So what you will find is that your children, often when you're giving them an instruction, you're breaking something up that they are doing and quite happy doing. And you're going to be asking them to do something which they may not be excited about. So packing up toys, going to bed, brushing teeth, somehow all children vigorously resist those moments. I mean, you tell most mothers, would you please go to bed? And they're like, oh, thank you, Jesus. And they're off into bed, you know. Tell children to go to bed and, you know, it's war. So it's the reality is a lot of that rebellion arises very quickly in their hearts. And if you expect instant obedience, you might be, in a sense, unnecessarily going into a battle that you don't need to go into. So if you imagine in a child's mind, they're sitting watching TV or playing a game or building a model, whatever it is they're doing, playing with their friends, it's a happy moment. You're going to give an instruction, and immediately rebellion is going to rise up in their hearts because they don't want to do what you're asking them to do. So if you require instant obedience, you are going to potentially always be in conflict. What we have found very helpful is give a few minutes warning. So if your children are playing in the corner over there, you go and say, guys, it's supper in 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask you to tidy up your toys, and then you'll come for supper. So already they've started to, that rebellion will in a sense rise up, but they've got enough time to process it. and they know, okay, well, mom's going to come back and expect obedience. So it's not that you're giving the instruction twice, you're giving warning of an incoming instruction so that they are going to have time to just manage their emotions, disengage from the fun moment. If they're watching a movie and it's like they've got 3 minutes to go, let the movie run its course. So otherwise you frustrate them. You don't want to think about it from the children's point of view and try to avoid frustration because that leads to unnecessary conflict.
And now this is what you talk about in Milo time. So we have a thing of 5 minutes. We just hold up the hand. Even now, we'll be somewhere and we'll just go into the room of our teenagers and go, and they all go, and they know that they've got, we don't have to say anything now. Or we just go in and we just give a look and they know that it's 5 minutes. And it's really helpful, but you'd explain this in Milo time, say this is what we're going to start doing now. So before bed, before brushing teeth, before coming to the table, before doing homework, before doing chores, we're going to give you the 5-minute warning. And again, role play with little ones. You can pretend you can role play going to bed, how you want them to go to bed. 5 minutes, and then they'll have to go do their thing. They love that.
So you're just trying to make it easy for them to obey you. You really want to win the battle of obedience and not fight for it, if I can do it like that. All right, and then you don't repeat your instruction, you don't threaten, and you don't bribe. There's nothing else. You're just going to give the instruction, and that's it. This is probably the hardest part for the parents.
You have to train yourself. This is the hard bit for us.
You only speak once, and then, or we'll talk about the and then in a moment. But if you think right back to the start of this, the goal of this time, of this thinking, is that your children obey you first time with a happy heart all the way. So the moment you repeat yourself or do I'm going to count to 3 and then expect you to obey. So, if your children can obey you on 3, they really can obey you on 1. It's just a reality. It's just a pattern. It's a pattern of parenting that you've got to train yourself to think, my children will eventually obey me, so why don't I just bring that eventually right back to the beginning and expect them to obey me when I first speak? Because that is actually what God wants of us. You think God's requirement of us as believers is that He would speak to us and that we would obey Him. That's all He wants of us, is that out of our love for Him, out of our respect for Him, we would say, yes, God, I'll do that for you. That's what He wants for us. And it's actually an expression of a love relationship between a child and a parent, that would be the case.
Fortunately, when we tell our children's bedtime, we don't need them to say, well, I want 3 prophetic words to say it's bedtime.
Yeah.
Confirmation, Mom.
So, and that threatening doesn't just have to be in your words. It's in your tone, in your language, in anything. So, right.
What I realize is I look at my parenting and they're like these spikes of irritation, frustration. And I've learned to realize that when I feel that in a certain situations, because I'm not doing something proactively, I'm not setting them up for success, I'm not expecting first-time obedience, and that actually if we just work through it, it then becomes one of those instead of one of those.
So that is all about communication. The first of the C's of achieving this is you've got to be proactive, set up your kids for success, talk this all through with them, be fair and adequate, and communicate well. It's kind of a key point. If you don't do that, you will doubt whether or not you have the right to carry on into the next stages. The next of the...
And it might seem a bit tedious. It seems so much work just for one thing. But what you find is as a family, you start getting into a bit of a rhythm. It's a bit like when you learn a language. When you first start learning language, it feels like, it's going to take me forever to learn this. But you get into a rhythm, and it becomes easier and easier. And you've set a culture in your family that just gets easier.
Okay, so that was the first of the C's. The next one is, consistency. All right? So effectively what you're doing in your parenting is you're drawing a line in the sand and you're saying to your child, if you step over that line, there will be a consequence. That over the line will be disobedience. They do not listen to your voice. They do not respond to your voice. So what that looks like is, and depending on your child, we have one child who, some children you say, there's the line in the stand. This is what mom and dad expect. And they're like, great, and they just happy.
They don't go near it.
Don't near it. We have another child who would walk up to the line and, in a sense, stand right on the edge and then sort of lean over and touch the other side. So now he's like, oh, now has the child disobeyed or not? You know, what's going on here?
It's exhausting.
And every time we did anything, it was like this exhausting, soul-searching moment. It's like trying to, has this child actually disobeyed us or not?
It is
And
so exhausting.
But that's just the nature of the game, you know.
And he still does it.
Maybe you've got one of those also.
I think there's one in every family.
There's one in every family. Okay, so consistency. How do you achieve consistency? The first point is that you both, this whole thing of unity, both the parents, and if there's, I would even go so far as to say, if there's another caregiver in the home, if there's a nanny or a granny or whoever is having a lot of influence in your children, is that they should be in agreement with you. They should be brought into agreement with you. So we required that, because we have a lady who works as a domestic helper in the home, and there are times when the children were younger, that she was at home alone with the children, and our requirement was that if they didn't obey her, she wouldn't bring about the consequence, but she would tell us about it, and then we would do it. So the requirement was our children had to obey Mama Deni, as they called her. It was that for us was she's the authority in the home when we are not there, and that they should obey her. And so we, in a sense, had to coach her, teach her how to parent our children, because they're our children, and it was what we expected of them, that out of respect for her that they would do that. So that's important. And the next one is on this is that if you think about what you've already achieved up until now, you've already had all that conversation with your children, you've set the boundaries, you've discussed the consequences, and all that you're going to do is that if your child crosses that line, you're bringing about something which, in a sense, they know about, they've chosen it, they've chosen to disobey, and you have removed, in a sense, a lot of the emotional anxiety around parenting, because it's a fairly, in a sense, black and white moment now. It's just clear, hopefully clear, if you've communicated well, that there's a moment of disobedience, and all that is required of you as a parent is that you bring about the consequences. We're going to talk about consequences in a moment, but whatever you've decided to do, if your child disobeys, every time, whether they do it once by mistake, in a sense, or for the 50th time that same day they've done that thing wrong, you would bring about the consequence.
And also it brings stability to children and a sense of, I suppose, stability in the home. Because I don't know if any of you grew up in a home which were homes that were volatile, where you had a parent who, at just a snap of their fingers, would suddenly become Mr. or Mrs. Nice Guy through to Mr. and Mrs. Horrendous. They had a temper or something. And as a child, you feel so insecure because you never know if mom and dad are going to blow. But if they just know that if they cross over the line, there'll be a consequence, whatever the consequence is. And we're going to tell you a whole lot of tools. It just brings consistency. Think about God. He's consistent. If he says, don't do this, and we do it, there's a consequence. And he just consistently brings about consequences when we choose to disobey him. So it just brings peace in the home, even if they are being disobedient.
Good. So the thing to avoid there is, you might say, negotiating under conflict. So in a moment when a child does disobey, and they've done something wrong, they haven't listened, and they've definitely crossed the line, and you might be tempted at that point to withhold the consequences because you feel sorry for the child, or you just don't have the energy, or whatever it might be. You're tempted to, in a sense, negotiate, or your child's pleading with you, please, don't do that, don't do this. And then you are, if you back away from that line and you say, okay, really what you're doing is you're going to encourage manipulation in your family, which you don't want. You don't want your children to be able to manipulate situations. You just want to be, it's like, you want to always treat it like the law of gravity. Gravity is very consistent. I mean, imagine if it wasn't, but if it just works every time. across the world, the same thing happens. And it's just how it should be. It's an unemotional thing. It can be a painful thing if you fall off something, but it's just the reality of life. It must be, you almost want your parenting to get to that place where if your children cross that line, whatever you've set that line to be, it's just a consequence. It's just what happens in life. You can even commiserate with them. You can sympathize and say, guys, I'm so sorry that you have to go through these consequences, but there it is. You agreed that we weren't, if you disobeyed mom and dad, that you weren't going to be allowed to watch a movie on Saturday. Let's just take that as an example. You've got a movie night on Saturday night, but if your children haven't done their chores during the week, then they don't get to watch the movie. You can say, I'm so sorry, and they're like, oh, Mom, please, we've got friends coming over. I would love to say yes, but you agreed to those consequences, and that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. If you step off the building, you fall. It's just what happens. Just to be quite clinical about it, if I can put it like that. It's an unemotional thing. Right. Sure you got it? Okay. So let's look at the last thing, the bigger area of consequences. I think the main thing there is a consequence to every parenting moment. When you give an instruction, something is going to happen. Your children will either obey you the way you want them to, or they won't. And then there will be a consequence. So the consequences are not always negative. Okay, there've got to be a whole lot of positive consequences also, which we'll talk about at first, but there should always be a response. The reason why I make this point is that very often as parents, we only respond negatively. In other words, we are, in a sense, waiting for our children to disobey us, and the bulk of our parenting is in the handling of disobedience. So we have to handle disobedience, but it's a very productive area. It's very fruitful when we are also bringing about positive consequences, when they obey us happily.
And the reality is, in life, there are consequences for everything. And as parents, we often want to shield our children from consequences. So we send them to school, and the night before you said, pack your cricket stuff. And they don't. They choose not to obey. They go to school, next thing you get a text. Mum, I've got cricket in an hour. I need my cricket kit or else I'm going to get into trouble. You know what a lot of moms do? They find a way of driving. I don't know if that happens in Zim, but they drive and they'll stop work and they'll just stop everything and they run around and they take the cricket stuff so little Susie doesn't get into trouble. Or this is a boy now because it's cricket. But you're actually not helping them. They need to learn that if you're going to not listen to mum and dad who give you a thing to pack your cricket stuff, there's a consequence. If you keep on driving across town and take their homework or take their things or they left their lunch behind, they're never going to learn. But if they have to go without lunch for a week because they keep on forgetting to pack it into their school bag, they're not going to die. They're not. You know what? Children are really good at surviving. Let them go hungry because they'll remember to make their lunch and put it in their bag. At the end of the day, when they leave home and they work for someone, their boss, there's going to be consequences. If you don't do your job, you get a discipline, whatever. If you don't do this, this happens. If you do it well, you get promoted. They need to learn that there are consequences, good and bad. And if we keep on shielding our children all the time from negative consequences, they actually never become adults. Even though they can be 30, they don't become adults.
Not many of our government officials are accountable like that. It's the reality of it. I mean, we honestly look at a lot of the behavior we see in both our countries' governments is to do with the lack of parenting. People do not understand consequences. Anyway, I'll start ranting if I get it on that line. So let's just look at the first of the ones. The first one is, these are positive consequences, is affirmation. Well done. Verbalized, well done. That's what the affirmation means. And what the reason why I put this in here, and I really mean this, is to encourage fathers listening on the video, whatever this thing, audio, is the words of a father, the affirmation of a father, the well done of a father will establish more than 50 responses to disobedience. There's really something, but there's something about the culture of men that we withhold our words. There's many, many men who struggle to verbalize a well done to their children. And the more we can do it, when our children obey us, or we see the signs of obedience, or even if you see a child wrestling with obedience, and they're struggling to overcome rebellion, that is a praiseworthy thing to say, I can see you struggling, but keep going, affirm them, because it counts for a lot. It really does. And if you think about how God corrects, if you know your scriptures and you know the book of Revelation, when he writes those letters to the churches, all of those letters, some of which carry quite sound rebukes to the church, they are all preceded by some affirmation. God says, I see this about you guys. Well done. You do this well. You do that. Every single one of those letters starts off and ends with God's affirmation, saying, well done on these areas. There's this one area you've got to deal with. And it's a really important part. We must be in the pattern of affirming our children, so that there's a lot of good things that we are recognizing in them. We're saying, I see that about you. I love that about you. Well done on that thing.
Another thing, the reality is we live in a generation where there are a lot of fatherless children. And perhaps you are a single parent or you are a father. We can add value to society as men, not me, the men can add value by speaking words of affirmation over other people's children who don't have fathers. So I can think of Tenda, if he were to see a young man or a young girl in your community who's just doing something so well, for him to speak words of life and affirmation is just going to be like water to a very dry, dusty land. And so we as a community can speak, and as women as well, we can obviously also do the same thing, but there is something about men speaking words of life over youngsters that literally just makes them grow taller. It's beautiful. And another thing is to pass on compliments, so affirmation, what we did, so a positive consequence. So for example, your kids are being amazing tonight, so when you're in the car, you can tell them how incredible they are and how you're so proud of them. And we might think, you know what, they should know. No, they don't. You can never affirm children. So if we've been somewhere or my kids have been somewhere, have you ever had that thing where you say, people go, oh, your children are so lovely. They did this. The other day someone said, no, your child's so hardworking. He went on an outreach to Lesotho, and I asked how he was because his work ethic is a bit dodge. And so I asked the guy that he was with. He says, no, he works so hard. I actually had to tell him to stop working. I was like, my son. I had to say, just say that again. I couldn't believe it. But then to pass that compliment on and to say, this is what Dion said. He said you did this. It's so incredible. So pass them on.
Very important. So the next one is also a positive consequence, is what we term random rewards. Okay. So every now and then, if your kids are in a good pattern of behavior and linked to that conversation that you've had, that proactive Milo time conversation, and you maybe a couple of weeks into this thing, or and you just really wanting to celebrate with your children good behavior, we would just do something spontaneous that you wouldn't normally do. So like just say, guys, who would like a sweet, but link it to what you're trying to achieve, not just who would like a sweet, because of course they just want a sweet. Say, guys, remember we spoke about this stuff at Milo time? I just want to say you're doing such a great job. Well done. And you give them a something, or take them somewhere, or something that they would like to do, or they get a special privilege. Who would like to choose the menu for supper tonight, or whatever will stir them to think, Mom and Dad are proud of me. They are being done. It's not offered as a bribe, so don't offer this in advance of good behavior and say, well, if you do this, then we will have that. It's a spontaneous moment. If you use it too often, your children will start to look for it, and then you haven't won there. You've got the wrong heart here again. It becomes self-serving. They're thinking, okay, well, if we're good, then we will get. You want to avoid that, honestly. You do not. What you are aiming for is children who want to be good for its own sake. They want to respond because it's the right thing to do. That's the higher way we're aiming for. What we don't want is, if I'm good, I'll get something. because that's actually a very low standard. It's how the world works. As Christians, we don't need to operate like that. We do it for its own sake. So you don't use it too often. Celebrate. It's a moment of celebration. And if you can do it with a child or a whole family, it's done. It's good work. Right. Another positive one is, if you can just bring up all the points here, because so what we call timeout. And the reason why I put it under positive, it's not a negative thing, it's almost like a neutral one. So what can happen? Timeout is removing a child from where they're about to do something wrong. Okay? So a typical example would be in our family, where the two younger siblings will often start arguing with each other, and if left unattended, it will turn into something where we have to now step in and bring about a very negative consequence. It might even be like somebody will hit the other one or something like that, because anger is starting to brew. So a timeout is where it's not in reaction to a moment, in a sense like a punishment. It's not isolation. It's going into that situation and saying, guys, I can see this is getting out of hand. I suggest, or go to your room and go and do something else. Effectively, it's go and do something else because this thing's getting out of hand. And so with our one child who is prone to anger, we've coached him, and he's learned to do it himself now, is we would say to him, go to your room. It's not go to the bathroom and sit there on the toilet and stare at the wall. This is not the naughty corner. It's go to your room, just go and read a book for a while, put on some music, get your emotions under control. That's really what he's saying, is this thing is about to get out of hand, and you know what happens if it gets out of hand. And so go to the room, when you feel ready, come back into society when your emotions are under control. And it's an incredibly helpful life skill. If any person struggles to control their emotions, if you've got a child, whatever it is, if they're struggling to control their emotions and it's going to lead to disobedience or some other form of something you don't want, and you have to then discipline, parent that moment, it's a great life skill, even as a husband and wife.
Yeah, so I use this. In our relationship, Richard's so even keel, a bomb can go off next to him and he just sort of carries on, whereas I can be a little bit more dramatic, and I can get, when I'm a bit stressed or tired, I can overreact. And there have been times, quite often, where I just say to Richard, I'm going to the bedroom. And he just goes, yeah, I think you should. So then I want to scream at him. And then the best is when my 14-year-old the other day says, Mom, I think you should go to your bedroom. And I wanted to smack him right there and then. Not that I would, because I mustn't do that. But I was like, don't tell me I need to. I know I do, but I don't want you to tell me. But it's a life skill, because then I just remove myself and I'm modeling something to them. You know what? I'm not actually responding very well to you. I'm not actually responding in a godly way. I'm just going to go and have half an hour, clear the head, and then I'll come and be your mom again.
So don't ever use this, don't use time out as a reaction to a bad behavior. I mean, it's really unhelpful if your children are fighting and you say, right, that's it, go to your room, and you're there for an hour or half an hour, whatever it might be. Because your children will go and they'll find something fun to do in their bedroom, and they'll be reading books and whatever they're going to do. If you send them to the toilet, they'll be flushing toilet paper down the loo. And, children will turn it into a game, and so it's actually, this is very ineffective as a reaction moment. It's a bomb squad moment. You're heading off a disaster, and we found it very helpful in our family to do that. So those are positive. The next one I want to deal with is negative consequences. And negative consequences always involve some sort of pain. Not always physical pain, but the point of it is that you are going to be bringing about a painful situation into a child's life. It's a negative consequence. Negative equals pain. And we mustn't shy away from it. So I was making this point last night, but there are literally entire philosophies of parenting, which we would group together to call child-centered parenting, where it's almost like seen as terrible to bring about pain to children. It's like seen as the worst thing you could do. How can you reduce the happiness of a child? It's like as if you're doing something criminal, and it's really quite a problem. Well, I think it's a very negative thing. But there are philosophies like that. I just want to speak a little bit about this on the importance of pain. You know, pain, if you think about it, is a, if you can just bring up the text underneath there, pain is a safety mechanism in your life and my life. If you could not feel pain, you would blunder through life inflicting huge injuries on yourself. I've got a very good friend who's got a terrible form of diabetes and he's lost all sensation in his feet. He stood on a nail in the workshop.
A rusty nail.
A rusty nail, and he walked the entire day with a rusty nail in his foot. And he almost lost his foot from the resulting infection. And, you know, pain is God's gift to us. It's how, how he gets our attention. And there really is a significant, there's a whole lot of neurological science to back this up. There are incredible learning patterns in our head that respond to pain. I mean, if I were to ask you, think of the most painful moment of your life, physical pain, where maybe you touched something or fell into something, or, I mean, I can remember once when I was about 5, my parents were at a braai, and there was a whole lot of these big concrete braais at a dam or something, and I was careering around, and I tripped, and I fell, and I put my hand on the hot grid, and, I mean, basically had a beautiful pattern of the grid on my hand. 5-year-old. I mean, I can remember, I can play that video, like, absolutely. Like, I can just see the whole scene. I can see how my parents reacted. I can see how everybody else reacted. And, you know, that's what pain does. So when we are training our children, particularly in the areas of moral, of the training of the heart, the issues of the heart, pain is not to be shied away from. It's honestly a gift. You quickly get the attention of your children with pain. And I almost feel like what's the right word? You know, like I think of the philosophies of today. I feel like we are under a huge pressure as a generation to avoid pain. So much of our lives is about how do we avoid pain. And I just think as parents, we mustn't shy away from it. You're not being a bad parent if you bring about pain into your children's life as a legitimate consequence. Very clearly, we are separating ourselves from abusive parenting. Okay, so we are, I mean, to me, it's sort of so obvious that the whole argument has been swayed. I mean, like in South Africa, we've just had the constitutional decision that it is illegal to spank children. Parents may not smack their children, but it's in reaction to abuse.
Yeah.
We're not talking about abuse.
Yeah.
Everybody would agree abuse is bad.
Yeah.
But the right of a parent, the need for a parent to be able to bring about painful situations, some of them physical, some of them in other forms, we'll talk about it. It's a direct access to the wiring of our children's brain so that they can remember what is right and what is wrong. It's a necessary process. It's godly. To me, it's absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how to run your lives, but I can say for me, if I was growing up my children now from a young age, I would ignore the laws of our country because to me it's ungodly to do that. And you're not being abusive as a parent if you do that.
Particularly if you've done those 3 C's. You've communicated up front, you've come into agreement, you found the one thing, you've been consistent, and you're being almost unemotional about it. Yeah. Right.
So there are some provisions we would make. The first one is be fair. All right? Don't exasperate your children. So what that looks like, the primary one is allow your children to be able to appeal, if I can use that word, or speak about the context of why they may have been disobedient. Understand if a child is not characterized by disobedience and they disobey you, there may be something else at play that you need to understand.
So, for example, a friend of ours, one of the children's chores was to take the compost out and to the bottom of the garden, put on the compost heap, the bucket. And her son was characterized by always doing it. And one night, he'd forgotten to do it during the day, and she said, "Jordan, please take the compost out." And he looked at her and he said, "No." And she was like, "No, you must." No, he absolutely refused. And I think they did do some consequences. But it really bugged her because she thought, this is not normal. He doesn't normally do this. Sat down, spoke to him. It turned out that he was petrified of the dark.
Scared.
He was scared. He was scared of the dark. And so for him, he would rather endure a consequence than actually go and face his fear. If she had known that, she would have said, just leave it till the morning. But there, if he had been and that would have been a good situation where he could have appealed and said, Mum, I'm scared of the dark, please can I do it first thing in the morning?
But he was embarrassed to do that.
Yeah, which is fair
He
enough.
was embarrassed to say he was scared of the dark, so he just said no. But in her mind, I mean, actually, so what we would say to you is like, if your child's not characterized by disobedience, and it's an out of character thing where they're like just rebelling, you might find the consequence it will have no benefit at all, because you're not dealing with the issue. So the other example would be I'm trying to think. Let's say I've walked in to the children and we're wanting to have supper. So they're watching a movie and I see, okay, there's 10 minutes left. So I say, okay, guys, when the movie's finished, come in. And I exit the room. Mom comes in, not knowing that I've been there, and she says, guys, turn the TV off, we're having supper. Now, in a sense, there's conflict. The children are uncertain because both parents are given, one's given room and the other one's given a line to cross. So it would be unfair to bring about the consequence there. So always be fair. This is not about extracting the letter of the law, it's about winning the hearts of your children. So you don't ever want to be in a situation where your children are feeling their sense of justice is being violated. And so you almost want to have a conversation. They should have the freedom to say, Mom and Dad, but. And you would listen to that. Don't listen to an excuse and think, yeah, listen, you're pushing the line here, you know. Sometimes it can be difficult to make a decision of what's right or wrong, and you have to just judge for yourself. But at the end of the day, be fair. Okay?
And we've seen the fruit of this in our children's life. Where now the other day I was quite hard on one of my children. I was irritated, I was tired, I was frustrated. I probably should have gone to bed, but I didn't. And I was hard on him. And so, but he was good. He did what I told him to do. And then a few minutes later, he came to me and said, Mom, can I just say something? And I thought, oh, here we go. He said, this is how you made me feel. I thought it was unfair because of the following reasons, and I would have preferred if you'd done like this. It was, you know who it was.
Of course.
I was like, you're right. But then I could apologize, say, you know what, you're right. Actually, when I was being unfair, I felt the Holy Spirit say, Sheila, but I didn't listen to him. I just carried on. So, but it was lovely because now my children know that actually they can appeal and we will respond hopefully the right way.
So and then the other thing was when you are applying the consequences, I'm about to unpack what those consequences are. So I keep using the word consequences as a bucket term. But there, if you can bring up the next one there, is always apply the consequence, but there's a skill to doing it. In other words, remind them back to the Milo time conversation. So you've got to have had that conversation. And then you actually get them to remember, get them to verbalize what you agreed. So you guys, remember when we had that conversation? Yes, Mom. What did we say would happen if you disobeyed us on this issue? Because remember, this is, you make it, when you have those things, it's going to be issue specific. You're dealing with a few things at a time. What did Mom? What did we agree that would happen if you disobeyed Mom? And then they'd say, oh well, we're not going to be allowed to watch TV for a week. What have you just done? No, we disobeyed Mom. So what's going to happen? You literally just lead them through the remembrance of that conversation, because what that does is it takes away the negativity of the interaction from you. They're not looking at you and thinking, Mom is so unfair. What you're doing is you're reminding them of just the whole process, and at the end of the day you can say, I'm really sorry, but we have to go through this. You can sympathize, you can empathize with the pain that they're going to go through, that pain of loss, or even if they have to have a smack on the bottom, you can sympathize with them. But the key to this is you are emphasizing that they have chosen a pathway. You didn't force them onto this pathway. They were aware of the consequences. They were aware of what is right and wrong because you've explained that all up front. And now they have chosen the wrong path. That's the key word. They have chosen the wrong path, and there is a consequence to that wrong path. And it puts the burden, in a sense, of what's happened on them. This is not Mom and Dad being unfair. It's this thing of, actually, I made the wrong call. And they have to walk that road then. So, now what do you do with deciding how to discipline? There's some tools, and you got to just make a decision. So, in most parenting moments, you've got about, something happens in front of you, and you've got about 0.2 of a second, a millisecond, to try and make a whole lot of decisions about what is the right way to go. A lot of that stress is taken out of the equation if you've thought about this up front. But even then, you've still got to decide, what are you dealing with here? Because remember, we are not training obedience, we are training the heart of our children. So you've got to discern the heart. So the first major decision you've got to take is, are you dealing with a matter of the heart or just something else? In other words, is this a moral issue? Are you dealing with rebellion, or are you dealing with childishness? The two can look practically exactly the same, but the heart is different. So, for example, you can have a child.
I'll do it. Okay. So you can have two boys outside here playing cricket, or in the car park with everyone's cars there, and they've got the cricket ball, and you can go out and you can say, boys, please don't play cricket, because if it goes wrong, it goes through the Land Rover window and you're going to have to fix it. That's childishness. They just didn't think. However, if 10 minutes later or the next day you go out and two boys are playing cricket, now that's become rebellion, because they know the truth. They've been told playing cricket next to a Bentley is not a good idea. But and now they're disobeying you, so that's the difference. It can be running through the house and skidding and knocking over glasses. You're having friends round. It's childishness. It's an error. And then you say, please don't run around inside. But 5 minutes later, they're chasing each other and they're running through the lounge again. That's rebellion, because they know, they've been told that it's wrong, and they're choosing to disobey you.
So that's the first thing you have to do, is you've got to discern what you're dealing with, because the response is, you do respond to childishness because that's training. You've got to train your children not to be childish.
Discipleship, yeah.
That's part of the process. But when you're dealing with a heart, it's very different. So let's take, for example, the one that Sheila said about knocking glasses over. So if a child comes through and they knock over something off the table, that is not a moment, in a sense, to get angry. The child has just made a mistake. It's childishness. But there's still a consequence, because that's what life is about. If you make mistakes, there are consequences. So guys, okay, stop your game, go get the dustpan, get the broom. Even your young children, you might have to supervise it and help. You might end up doing more of the work, but it's not just mom rushing to clean up the mess. Involve the children. Get them to do it. There's no anger in your voice. There's no disapproval. It's just, okay, it happened, but let's clean up the mess. That's the consequence. They're involved in the repair of the moment. If an older child knocks a ball through your neighbor's window, you don't rush there and just sort of make it all go away. Okay, that happened. It was an accident. I understand. You were careless. Okay, but maybe this part of that repair is going to come out of your pocket money, or you're going to come and help me next Saturday. We're going to go and fix it. Maybe you're going to offer to mow that guy's lawn. There's a related consequence to the thing that happened, even for childish moments. But it's not. It's more of a training moment as opposed to a negative reaction. It's just like the life happened, but you've got to deal with it, because that's how Scripture sees it. There's so many things in the Old Testament where with those codes of conduct, if you dig a hole and you don't warn your neighbors, and your neighbor's donkey falls in the hole and dies, you're responsible, actually. That's what the Scriptures would put, all those sort of what they called restitution laws. In other words, if you do something carelessly and it affects somebody else, there's restitution. You've got to be part of the fixing. And that's what you want to train in your children. That's the consequence.
And it's really good life skill, because I'm sure we all know people where they've asked to borrow something and then they break it, they don't fix it, or they abuse it, and it comes back worse for wear. We want to be training our children that are good citizens in our community, who if they borrow something and they break it, they fix it. My dad always had a thing. When we were brought up, is you return something in better condition than you received it. When we went on holiday, we used to go camping, and you got the communal dish areas, and he'd say, okay, Sheila and Andrew, my brother and I, you make sure that this cleaning area is cleaner than when you arrived. And it was just something of being a blessing to community. And as Christians, it's lovely to go and to give that extra mile. For Richard, when he does a job, the client is expecting A, B, C. Richard always tries to make sure he adds on D and E. Just as a way of, you know what, I know you pay me for A, B, C, but I want to do things with excellence. So we're teaching them a principle of being adders to society, not just receivers.
So often as parents, it's much easier just to fix it ourselves because we can do it quickly and
Or get
it's
someone
just
else to
done.
do it.
Or get somebody else to do it. But actually there's great value in when our children mess up, that they are part of it's a necessary part of growing up, that they would learn to undo the crisis. Always use that to teach them the morality, the right and wrong of the moment. So if your children do run through the home and they damage something or whatever it is, you pause that moment and say, guys, okay, well, while you're cleaning up, see, so when I say don't run in the house, you then use that moment to say, this is why I said, please don't run in the house, and because of these things, and you train them, you teach them, and then they are part of it. But it's just training, all right. But if it's a heart issue, if they have disobeyed you, and you sense, and sometimes it's a Holy Spirit sense, parents can see into the hearts of their children, and you just have a think, this is rebellion. You know, the scriptures put it like this: rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft. I mean, that is a strong statement from the Old Testament. You know, rebellion is the one thing that God has fought against in the human heart. I mean, every single chapter of the Bible is about God's wrestling for the human heart, trying to encourage us to not rebel against Him. I mean, it is like such a core issue. And if your children are rebelling against you, it is a heart matter, and it elevates, even if the actual action was small. If you sense rebellion, it is a significant thing. You do not want to step away from rebellion in your children, because left unattended, rebellion takes root, and it takes a whole lot of things into the future that you don't want to see in your children. So you can have even relatively innocent rebellion, innocent-looking rebellion. A child, when you give an instruction and it's your sweet little girl, 3 or 4 year old, and then she's like and she makes a joke of it and disobeys you, it is rebellion. It's rebellion with a happy face. And actually, I mean, it's the same heart. If you are discerning the heart of rebellion, whether your child is doing it happily or not, it's the same consequence. She disobeyed at that point. So, what did you want to say? Okay, so there are a whole lot of consequences we're going to look at quite quickly, and we'll refer back to them tomorrow when we'll deal with this. And then we've got about another few minutes, 5 minutes or so, and we'll land tonight. So the first one is natural consequences, painful natural consequences. So if mom and dad will often give instructions that will be there to protect their children. So guys, the patio is wet, the tiles are wet, don't run on the patio. Children run on the patio, shroop, clunk on the floor, howl, tears, floods of tears. You know what, that is not a moment to sympathize with your children. You quickly check to see there's no broken bones and blood. If your children are going to survive the moment, it's actually like, well, sorry, I did tell you. And it's like, that's it. It's like, it literally can be pat. You can be nice to your children. You sympathize, but it's not like, oh, we can, it's just, that's life. If you don't touch the electric fence. I literally have one of my children. We have a perimeter electric fence for security. Don't touch the fence. It's a very strong electric fence. And I was like, well, I was like, what are you? I was like, that's
silly. Another one is if your children's chore is to make their own lunch for school, and then they don't do it or they leave it behind, and they go hungry, natural consequence. You're hungry. Don't rush and give them money or organize something. Just let them go hungry. They need to learn.
There was such a great example from when we taught this in Francis Town. There was a lady who stood up when we were teaching this section. She said she works a full-time job. Saturday is washing day. Sunday was ironing day. She was a single mom, and then the children went to school. So if the washing was not on Saturday, it didn't get washed. And her daughter didn't put her washing in on the Saturday.
Her school uniform.
And her daughter was very proud of her appearance. And she had this rumpled, dirty uniform. And mom was like, well, too bad. And she had to wear the whole week, whatever it was.
She never ever did it again.
Yeah,
it worked.
You know what I mean? It's just life. Don't protect your children from life. Once you're sure they're going to survive, it's okay you want your children to survive, but find the balance, And so that's a good thing. Let natural consequences run their course, because they will learn a huge amount from it.
And even if it's rebellion, so you've said, please put your bike away at night and lock it away. and they don't because they choose not to, and it gets stolen, shame. Sorry, you rebelled. It's your fault. Don't rush out, get a new bike. They
Yeah.
need to learn the consequence.
Are we sounding a bit harsh here? I don't know.
That's what God did. He said, you know, if you go and do this, there's
Yeah.
going to be this consequence.
Yeah.
They went and did it. There was this consequence. And he's like, well, I'm sorry. You could have listened to me.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think of how Deuteronomy ends, he says, there's this way of life, such blessing. I just want to give you such blessing. Choose, and then there's this way of death, and there's such a way of death. Choose life. I mean, that's the heart of God, isn't it? He says,
This is why
there's
we
two
institute
options
this.
here.
Yeah.
If you follow my ways, what a blessing. If you don't, well, good luck. And okay, so the next one. These are, so the first one was what we called natural consequences, where you just let it run its course. The next one, the next group are imposed. In other words, you are going to bring them about as a parent. The imposed, have you gone to, can you just go up one? One more? Right. I thought we had one before. Yeah, sorry, that one there, it's got out of order. Okay, let's just start here. This is what the scriptures call admonishment, but it's just really a stern verbal warning. And you are very clearly communicating disapproval. This is not a happy moment. Your child has disobeyed, and it's often you should mostly use this if your child is not characterized by disobedience. In other words, it's more of a slip-up. I remember one of my children recently, they were hanging out with their friends, and they're normally such a compliant child, and they were hanging out with their friends and a group of them there, and I gave a reasonable instruction, and because they were hanging out and trying to be cool with their friends, there was a little bit of attitude came in, you know, and he was like, no, Dad, I'll do it later. And I was like, really? But he's not characterized that. So
You gave him the look.
I gave him the look, and I just called him over because you don't ever want to embarrass your children.
Yeah.
See, none of this is there to embarrass your children. So I just called him over, and I just gave him a 1 minute talking to, which communicated my disapproval with his attitude towards me in front of his friends, and we just left it at that. And he was very apologetic, and it was like it's a lapse of. He just made a mistake, actually, in the moment. He got caught up in the moment, and so it was just a warning. It's just saying, you're out of line. Sometimes it can just be the clearing of the throat or something like that. You're just
Or the
warning.
look. We're talking about the look.
The
You know,
look.
they just know the look. Do you have a look? Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a time and a
Go
place
down?
for
No,
the look.
sorry. What happened
It
to...
conveys so
Keep
much.
going. Go back to the same one. Where that one? Is there another word? There we go. But you don't want to be caught up where this is all you're doing, because your children are very. This is only ready to be used in isolated instances. It's not. Your voice will start to lose its impact if that's all you ever do is warning. So don't use it repetitively. Okay. Can you go to the one that says isolation? I don't know what's. There we go. There. So this looks a little bit similar to what we spoke about in terms of timeout, but this is now a reactive, negative consequence. And okay, so what we're dealing with here primarily is it's being removed out of a sociable, friendly environment, and you are placed into isolation. And I wouldn't make it a bedroom. It was not a happy moment. This is the sit in the corner, or you go to the bathroom, or something like that, where they were having fun with their friends or with the family, but because of their disobedience, they no longer have the privilege of being with that group of people. They have to be isolated for some time.
So 2 examples. We had friends round, the children, they were playing in our pool, and one little girl was behaving in a way that was dangerous. She could actually hurt someone and drown them. So I gave her a warning. This was my friend's daughter, and I just said, you may not do that. Please don't do this. And I explained why. And she said, yes, Auntie Sheila, no problem. And 3 minutes later, she was doing it again. So then I said, you need to come and sit. And she's an incredibly sociable child. This can sting. Because remember we said we wanted to have pain. It's got to have a sting. This can sometimes sting some children more than a smack on the bum. It depends on their wiring. So I just said, Sarah, you're going to sit over there on a chair for 10 minutes. I put on a timer. You may not play with your friends. And so they all carried on having a great time. It worked like a bomb. She was amazing. She never, ever did that again, ever. And a friend of mine, she was struggling with her child eating properly at the table. Little's, I think it was her twins. They were about 3. So she said, you lose the privilege of, you have to be isolated when eating supper. And this is a sociable child. She loves her family, loves being with everyone. So they have a table down at the end of the passage, right down there. And Maisie had to take her plate, and she had to go all the way and sit by herself. It stung. There was pain in that. Another child will probably be, oh, so happy to sit by myself and eat. So this is not for everyone, but it can be really helpful.
And I suppose this, when it gets into teenage years, you're basically talking about if let's say a teenager is in a state of rebellion, you might say that's it. You lose the privilege of going to your friends for the video night or whatever the thing is, or if there's a big youth function on and they'd love to go there. Well, sorry, your behavior, you've chosen, we can't allow you to go. So it's isolation from pleasurable sociable contact, and it's very, very useful tool. Do you want to say something? Forgotten what you're going to say. Okay, another very big one is loss of privilege. Where is it? Sorry, I made a few changes, and they haven't manifested exactly how I wanted them to, but there it is. Loss of privilege is where this is very effective for a lot of children. There'll be something that they love to do, privilege. It's not a right. Big difference between privileges and rights. Watching TV, playing computer games.
Having a cell phone.
Having a cell phone, whatever the age-appropriate privilege might be with your children. Is those privileges can be revoked if they are disobedient. It's best if it is a related privilege. In other words, if...
I've got an example.
Okay.
So for us, we are very, very, very strict about sibling rivalry and the way our children interact. We have just had a no-go zone. It is like our big elephant. We have just, for some reason, that's what we felt. So what works very effectively, that if you cannot play nicely with your brother or your sister, you lose the privilege of having friends or a play date. And I would go so far as to say, well, if there was a moment where friends were there for the morning and they were being horrible to each other, I would then say that's the end of the siblings were horrible to each other, then they lose the privilege of having their friend, and the friend must go home, or we make a plan. But it really does, it must be related to the thing. So for example, another example is for us, we've been quite strict about screen time because we've just had a whole lot of research about what screens do to, if you look up, and computers and screens. So they're a reality in our lives, but they can be highly, highly addictive. And it's just a waste of time. I'd much rather my kids were playing outside, climbing trees, getting dirty. For me, that's a far healthier way of growing up than just sitting in front of a phone where they don't communicate with anyone. They're not having to learn communication skills, social skills. So what we've said to our children is that when they were younger, they're allowed half an hour of screen time that's not related to school every 5 days a week. And in holidays, it's 6. You must think we're draconian, but anyway. They're allowed half an hour where they can play any game which has been vetted by Richard and I. So we are happy with the computer game. And then, if they want more time, they can earn it. But it's minute for minute hard labor in the sun in the garden. And so, if you want extra time, you've got to wash the cars, mow the lawn, weed the garden, whatever, clean the windows. My boys will come to me and say, Mom, please can I earn time? And it's minute for minute. And then they'll get extra 15 minutes. Because then they really appreciate that 15 minutes that they've slogged out there. We once had potholes in our driveway, and they had to fill in potholes. It just depends. We make it hard work. We want our children to have good work ethics, to know what it is to go the extra mile. Yeah.
Yep. So
why am I
privileges,
talking about that?
I'm not quite sure, but it was good stuff nonetheless.
Oh, sorry.
But the point is that those privileges can be revoked. So
Yes, yes.
there was, if
You
we
take away the time.
if they often for us, if they've done something that is characterized by that, which is disobedient, we'll just say that's it. You've lost your computer time this week, and it's not like a major thing, but it's like it hurts them a little bit, and it's our minor level of, it's our minor go-to loss of privilege, if I can put it like that. And then the last one is what the scriptures call chastisement or spanking, which is now become illegal in South Africa, and I don't know what is it in Zimbabwe, if it's illegal or not. I think
It's illegal in schools. Okay, in South Africa, as a parent, I'm not allowed to.
so. To me, this
According
is
to
an
the government.
incredibly personal thing. And I honestly mean this. It's a very personal decision as a parent whether or not you're going to spank your children. I think the scriptures make provision for it, but they don't make it a requirement. We've got very, very good friends, godly family, who decided they would not spank their children. Their children are mostly grown up now, and they're wonderful children. We chose to spank our children, and our children are mostly grown up, and we've got wonderful children. So I think pray about it and speak to God about it. Have a sense in your heart what's right and wrong. Be in agreement as a couple about it. I think there are just some provisos that need to be in place. The first one is it must never be done in anger. I think that's the key. If you're angry inside, if your emotions as a parent are not in control, you head towards abuse. Not saying you are abusive, but you're heading in that direction. You're going to take out your frustration on your child. So it might be that you need to, if you're going to give a hiding, get your emotions. Give yourself half an hour so that you can do it unemotionally. And do it in a way. For us, it was a wooden spoon, a smack on the bottom, like a swat. It stung, but it didn't bruise. It was never done in public. We never did it in front of the other siblings. It was always a very private, personal moment with one of us and the child. We would hug the child afterwards until they had stopped crying. We would explain the whole story to them right from the beginning, and we would pray with them. There would be forgiveness. And it's amazing how it just cleared up everything. You know, it's like it really for us, it worked well. We understand that we've got very good friends. They have spanked some of their children, but there was one child, it made no difference whatsoever. He would talk back to them and say, "Is that the hardest you can hit me?" You know what I mean? It's ineffective. And if that's the case, then I would stop doing it and find something else in a sense that hurts.
These other ones.
Loss of privilege. You may not go to your friends. You can't do that. You can't do this isolation. You've got to find something that hurts. So it's not and don't ever see spanking as the last resort. Okay, there's some parenting philosophies say, okay, well, if your child disobeys you, then it's first going to be this, and then you're going to be more harsh, and then more and more, and then eventually you get to spanking your child because you're so angry with them and that's the big gun you're going to pull out when everything else has failed. Spanking for us, it was always in response to direct rebellion, lying, or violence in the family. Those were the major issues. So if we've given a direct instruction, a reasonable instruction, and there was rebellion, and we sensed rebellion in their hearts, immediately, whether it was a small rebellion or a big rebellion was irrelevant. It was called rebellion, and it went straight to having a smack on the bottom. Anything with manipulation or lying or stealing, like what we would feel were quite major character flaws if we saw them in our children, they would immediately go to a spanking.
And we also didn't do it till very old. So I think we did it for Emma and Tom, 5 or 6, we stopped and used the other tools. For the other two, probably 7 or 8. So we don't give hidings anymore. And our children can't remember it. So Thomas, he tells the story. I actually phoned my brother one day and said, I think I should wake up, give Thomas a hiding for what he is about to do for the day, because I would end up giving him a hiding every day, if not a couple of times, and it really bothered me. And the other day we had a chat and asked him, are you okay? Do you need counseling? He goes, I don't remember. He doesn't remember, a single hiding. It's amazing. And he got lots of them. It was when he was little, and it really did it was good for us, it worked for us.
So I think the heart of it is you never want to embarrass your children. None of these things are moments of public moments of rebuke. It's always taken away and you deal with it privately. You're speaking to their hearts. You're trying to train their hearts up. You're not just trying to affect behavior, which is, as I keep saying, quite a low standard to achieve. And for us, we've used all of these tools, and our children, when we look at them today, honestly can say we're proud of our children. We see the fruitfulness of this. They're not perfect. They still lapse in disobedience. We still have to tighten the reins every now and then. But in terms of what we've seen of this, it's worked for us really well. So we would encourage you as parents, find the energy to aim for this first-time obedience. It's a very fruitful area of parenting, and it's really quite a foundational area of parenting upon which many other things can be built, which we will talk about tomorrow. So we're going to land there. Sorry, we've gone over a little bit, but we started a bit late. So tomorrow...
the advert is, we're going to be looking at the different stages of parenting. So 0 to 4s, what you're trying to achieve, what are your main, the 5 to 12s, the 12 to 18s. We're going to be looking at that and make it very, very practical.
And also how to train your children to love good. We want good children, not just obedient children. Children who know and love good. How do we do that? It's a great time. How to build identity so that they know who they are in Christ. So many things. Very important. Another one. Self-control. How do we train our children to have self-control? Because that is a key. If you don't have that in life, as you might know for yourself, that lapses of self-control are very costly things in life.